Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Z segment doing my review for Dragon Ball Super Episode 4, which is called The Pilaf Gang's Grand Plan, as you could have obviously translated it in many different ways. But in this video, I'm obviously going to talk about the plot, the action, interesting details, my impressions, and my overall thoughts on the episode as a whole, as you guys have gotten the drill now from my previous Dragon Ball Super episode reviews. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So, let's first start off by talking about the plot. Now, guys, as you would have seen from my episode 4 predictions video, I actually predicted a lot more engagement in this episode between Goten and Trunks. I expected there was going to be some sort of conflict, not the fact that Goten and Trunks would actually kind of help out Emperor Pilaf and his gang actually get on the ship when they're essentially running from their lives from that shark. And I actually expected a lot more of the Pilaf gang. I expected them to actually do something in terms of actually trying to get the Dragon Balls, as opposed to actually getting in position to get the Dragon Balls. And that's one thing that I was actually wrong with in my prediction. Now, moving on to action, there is absolutely nothing to say. There were no action sequences at all. No type of fighting scenes. The closest thing to an action sequence that we saw was essentially Goku shooting a Kamehameha at himself. Yes, guys, that's the closest thing to an action scene that we saw in this episode. There's nothing to say here. This was an action-less episode. The closest other thing to action would have obviously been, you know, Pilaf and the gang actually trying to run away from the shark, and also Vegeta training a little bit. So there's nothing to really talk about here. So, now that we're on the topic of some of the interesting facts, one of the things that I wanted to point out is a little bit more visual as compared to the previous episodes of Dragon Ball Super, and obviously compared to Fakatsu no F and Battle of Gods. And it's just that I've noticed in this episode that the actual outline of the characters was very thick. And for those of you who might not relate to this completely, it's kind of like when you're typing up something on like Microsoft Word and you actually like bold your words. It's a lot more thicker. I noticed that in this episode. I don't know why they did it. It was a little bit different. It actually looked kind of weird for the characters to have that very thick layer around them, but that's obviously one thing that I noticed. The next thing that I wanted to point out as an interesting fact is actually when we see a very quick scene involving Piccolo and Dende basically giving each other a cheers with a glass of water. I felt this was like a nod to the fact that Nameks are obviously, you know, more like plants in the sense that they essentially need water. But a little bit of a contradiction to this and Dragon Ball as a whole is that we've seen in Dragon Ball before where Piccolo Jr.'s eating a fish, or we also see King Piccolo having a feast that Nameks have been shown to eat early in Dragon Ball, but then when Z came around, essentially they kind of just threw that around and kind of like, you know, changed this whole Namekian eating thing later on. And I've always felt that because of this, I combine the two and say that Nameks could theoretically eat, but they don't necessarily need to. And obviously this is a lot more reinforced more in the anime as opposed to the manga, where we also see another scene where Piccolo is training with Goku and Gohan and he was tired of eating fish. So the whole Namek eating thing is a little bit inconsistent throughout the entire series as a whole. But that's another observation that I noticed. The last thing that I wanted to point out is actually dealing with phrases and signs. As we see in this episode, there's actually a sign of Bulma's cruise ship that says Princess Bulma on it. And I found this really interesting because this is obviously in Japanese and they haven't actually translated it for the actual English viewers of the series. So it was really interesting to see the fact that they're kind of putting like English things in it. And Dragon Ball has had a tendency to do this along with a lot of other shows. So that's just another little observation that I've noticed that, you know, was actually kind of unique with the actual ship itself. Maybe it's trying to allude to more of an American styled event as opposed to more of a Japanese thing, but that's another observation I have. Moving on to my impressions of this episode. This episode, once again, as you know, seen with the other episodes, gave off another light-hearted feeling to it. Personally, I didn't find this episode to be as funny as the previous episodes, and obviously there was no action in it at all. But I did like the scene where we saw Emperor Pilaf on the boat actually trying to get to Bulma's ship, and I also did like you know, that device that Bulma had, where she essentially has like this one device that stops people from locating the Dragon Balls. That was also pretty interesting. And Emperor Pilaf was so lucky that Goten and Trunks essentially just shut it off for like just a quick second for him to locate it. I like that stuff a little bit, and I definitely found that it was comical to see Emperor Pilaf, but I definitely expected a lot more out of them in this episode. I thought this episode was going to feature them significantly more, and they were actually a lot, you know, I guess you could say a lot less featured than I would have expected them to be in this episode as a whole. But overall, the episode gave off another light-hearted feeling, and it honestly did feel like a filler episode. But those are my overall impressions of the episode as a whole. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I'm gonna have to give this episode a 2. I know that it's a little bit lower than all the others, actually significantly lower than all the others when you consider it. But honestly guys, I mean, I just think that episode 3 was just a drastic drop off from episodes 1 and 2. I thought episodes 1 and 2 were great, even though they were all lighthearted. All the episodes have been lighthearted, but I really felt that this episode added nothing really to the series. The scenes weren't as funny as the previous episodes. What gave episode 3 a little bit of leeway was it was a funny episode, but episode 4 was a downgrade in comedy. It was a downgrade in action completely, and it was a downgrade in terms of its plot because there was literally nothing that happened. I expected a lot more out of this episode. Even if it was going to be lighthearted, I expected a lot more comical moments and more moments even featuring the Pilaf gang on the ship, you know. You don't have to put a whole episode of them actually trying to get to Bulma's ship. You could have put them on the ship and actually have them like causing trouble. That would have been a lot more interesting to see, even if it's just 20 minutes that they could actually feature it out. But you know, those are my overall thoughts for today, guys. I'm going to do a predictions, and I hope you guys liked my what if. I spent a couple of weeks working on that, and I'm going to be cranking out these super reviews from here on out. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys. And I hope you guys like the blooper I have for you guys at the end, because let's just say my audio completely went haywire. Giving you guys a super review and a super predictions every single week from here on out. You guys want it, and here you'll get it.
So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, subscribe, and remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.